Oh my god.
What the fuck?
Cappy!
You're a liability, Gretchen. I can't let you out.
Pissing off the crows.
Hello there.
Hello, everybody,
Hi there.
and welcome to
Evil Asterisk
Podcast
Podcast.
with Jeannie.
And who am I? It's Levy. I like it.
What did we watch this time?
Cuckoo.
Cuckoo!
Cuckoo.
Cuckoo! We saw an indie horror film called Cuckoo. It's actually on Hulu, but we saw it on Disney
Yeah, just for
Plus
the better
it's bundled.
streaming quality.
I will immediately read the description, just so we have that. A 17-year-old girl is forced to move with her family to a resort where things are not what they seem.
Nicely vague.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we don't want stuff given away. We're not fans of spoilers in descriptions. So this is a good one. The director and writer is Tilman Singer, the same person that did Luz.
Yes.
Okay.
L-U-Z, which is
Which we
light in
saw.
Portuguese.
Starring Hunter Schafer. Dan Stevens is the obvious one with the
Good
and
old
credit.
Dan.
Good old Dan shows up for some indie horror films.
Always
every
shows
so
up for
often.
some fun times at the movies.
I didn't recognize anyone else, but
Well, I think Jan Bluthart, he was in Loose as well.
let's see what we can get away with before the spoiler section. Okay.
Yes.
This was an atmospheric movie, at least at the beginning, where the stage was set for something that almost looked like a 70s horror movie. It takes place near the Alps, and we see some interesting scenery. So that was nice. We heard German at the beginning, and we thought, oh, maybe it's going to be a German film, but it was basically an English-speaking film. It's atmospheric. It has this interesting hue that made it look like more of a 70s, sort of a burnt offering.
Yeah, there's a car in the beginning, a red
The
car.
Sentinel, those types of movies.
There's a car in the beginning, a red car, that I had a really hard time identifying. I still don't know exactly what it is.
Well, it looked like a Triumph, right? But
yeah,
it wasn't
we
a
thought
tiny
we
car.
saw a tag for Triumph, but I didn't know they made station wagons or brakes.
It almost looked like
It's a four-door station wagon.
a version of a Jaguar. Not as nice looking, but it had that hood that was more stretched out that we like. But we need to identify that car. And Luis is usually really good at identifying every car in a movie. I said, what's that car?
strange European car.
I said, what car is that?
yeah.
And he said, I don't know. And then we tried to look at the name of the car while we were watching it. We just didn't want to keep pausing the movie. We saw a T, and it looked like it might have been a Triumph, but I always think of Triumphs as really tiny, like MG style cars.
Yeah.
But it might be something else. So the premise is that Hunter Schafer, who leads the cast, is playing a character called Gretchen. Gretchen is a 17-year-old. She's almost 18, so she's almost an adult. She's not happy to be where she is. They've traveled to this area because her father and her father's wife, which is her stepmom, they are going to be working on constructing or building out this resort. Dan Stevens plays Herr König. They pronounce it in a weird, maybe it's the right way. They were like, Herr König.
Guten Tag.
Guten Tag, Herr König.
And they made a big deal about the pronunciation of the name at the beginning, which I thought was odd. So there's Gretchen, main character. König, played by Dan Stevens. Her father, Luis.
Very good, Louise.
Luis.
And her stepmom, Beth. And then there's her stepsister, Alma. The issue here is that Gretchen, everything's done from her point of view, pretty much. And she is not happy to be there. She does not want to be there with her family. She wants to go back home. She apparently was living with her mother. Her biological mother died. That's what we're getting from this. Therefore, she can't go back and live with her. She's stuck because she's not quite an adult yet. She's stuck with her father, her stepmom, and then her stepsister. She doesn't want to be with any of them. She's not happy to be there. To the point where also she seems to have a lot of anger toward everybody. including her stepsister, which she says is not her sister. She is trying to distance herself so much from her father's second family to the point where she is rejecting her half-sister. And since it's a resort, the Dan Stevens character at some point says that he has a job available and she can work at the resort.
Yeah, clearly Gretchen is not happy at all with being in this place. And like Jeannie said, she had no choice. Being alone at her mom's place wasn't an option. Against her wishes, she's here in Germany in this setting, at this kind of idyllic place that almost feels out of time. Like Jeannie said, it looks like something out of the 60s or 70s. The cars are kind of oldish. A lot of the technology is older. There's like Walkmans, there's tape, there's voice answering machines with tapes in them. The assumption is that it's current day. I think I hardly saw a cell phone in it or like a smartphone.
Didn't she have a cell phone?
I could swear she did, but it wasn't like a big...
It might have been sort of an out of time.
They avoided it.
Then they did a really good job of that. It did feel like it was out of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, we even made a joke that it looked and sounded like the Sound of Music in the beginning.
Yeah, because we had just
with
seen that last
those
week.
beautiful mountains and the Alps.
The Alps. Yeah, we were
know.
joking. Yeah. We're going to see the Sound of Music again.
Yeah, divine.
No, it's good.
Yeah,
The hills
divine.
are alive. And
With the sound of cuckoo.
With the sound of
Cuckoo. And we really got a feeling, almost of nostalgia for a movie that hasn't even started yet.
right.
You know, and of course it was weird from the get-go, thanks to Dan Stevens.
Yes,
You know,
having
so-
a very strange accent, by the way.
Well, he is fluent in German.
No, I know,
which
but
is
he was
really
doing it on
interesting.
purpose. He was doing a funny accent on purpose, I think. He went,
Yeah.
Gretchen, or something like that.
This is Gretchen.
Gretchen.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the movie in general terms
Yeah.
and not in terms of plot, because once we go into plot, it's just spoiler territory everywhere.
Well, I
you know?
think there's certain things that we can say that are interesting. We've done it before where we bring in something that happens, but it's not a spoiler. So at the beginning, they arrive at the resort and Dan Stevens' character welcomes them. It's a really strange sequence too. She feels very, very distant from her family, as we mentioned. And we weren't even sure who everybody was. I was thinking, is that her dad or not? Because it felt so isolated and cold and indifferent. And I wasn't quite sure what was going on, really.
I kept getting a Stepford wife vibe,
Yeah,
like
the
she
Beth.
wasn't real.
Gretchen goes to the bathroom, and this is the first time we have some weird stuff, although there was a prologue. Prologue is too similar to some of the spoilers. When she goes into the restroom, she's like this badass person.
Rocker
This
chick.
And then she goes into the bathroom and something really weird happens where she thinks that her stepmother has come in to the restroom. She goes into a stall and there's just something really strange about the silence that happens. And then there's like a scratching sound on the door. And she looks down, sees boots. So all we see are these boots. Actually, we see the boots. I don't think she sees the
Yeah,
boots.
she didn't see them.
All we hear is some weird kind of scratching.
And then
We're not really
the closed
sure.
captions very helpfully pointed out to mechanical noises.
Gretchen says something like, oh yeah, I'm coming soon or whatever. She just thinks it's someone coming in there and she's talking. But whoever's in there with her is clearly not part of her family. She thought it was her stepmom, for sure. She starts to get out at some point, and then the stepmother comes in and says, hey, Gretchen. And then Gretchen's like, oh, who
It
was
wasn't
that?
her, yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was definitely creepy. Let's put it that way. That was not the toilet seat. That was the door. Oh my God.
Beth?
That was a mechanical startle.
Gretchen, let's go.
So in general terms, it had a good atmosphere. It had a creepy atmosphere, I would say. This is a real horror movie, unlike some of the ones we've seen in the past. So this is a real one. Stand assured,
It's definitely,
It's not some psychological
back-
thing. It's not
Well-
elevated horror.
it does harken back to the 70s. It does feel like it's taking from that playbook of this more atmospheric horror that we know and love from that time period. And that's why it works. We were talking about the creepiness. I appreciated the use of certain atmospheric elements. The use of sound, the types of sounds that we heard, the use of shadow. There was a moment that was probably what you're thinking that I got a little
Very effective.
startled. And can we say the use of time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or a sense of time.
A
Perception
sense of time. Those are all things that I think worked really well.
Yeah, I think it's a creepy movie. It's very effective. Like Jeannie said, there's plenty of atmosphere. And you really feel like you're in that place. You never get bored, really. I do think, and she agrees, that there's some major issues with storytelling. It's a complicated concept from the get-go. They just have a really, really hard time stringing a coherent story from A to B to C and bringing us, the viewers, along for the ride so we really understand what's going on. Half the time you're going to be kind of puzzled and asking what is happening or who's that or what's going on. So for such a small movie with such a limited geographical location with a small number of characters is incredibly complicated. And I can appreciate complication and complexity. I enjoy those things, but I have to say I spent too much time obsessing about what was actually happening versus really being able to enjoy it for what it was.
Right. Many times I would say, wait, what? I would look at you and say, wait, did I miss something? Are we supposed to know something here? And that took me out of the movie. I agree with you that there is a complicated element to this film that the audience doesn't understand at the beginning. We only get to the reveal at the end, like, oh yeah. So if we then go back in time and go, oh yeah, now I get all these little things that they were doing in the movie before we got the reveal. But when you're watching it, you're like taken out of the movie because they are trying to put so many little complicated things in there so that when you do get to the reveal, all of the previous elements make sense. But that is a storytelling problem because it doesn't guide you in. And there were some elements of lack of anticipation. I didn't feel a sense of dread, a sense of, oh no, what's going to happen next?
Yeah, it undermined the suspense. So it's funny how you have a movie that's creepy, that's atmospheric, that's fun to watch, that's intriguing, that makes you think, but without a real sense of jeopardy, you know, and without the creeping fear that something horrible is going to happen. It didn't have any of that. I was thinking just now that when you have a high concept movie, blockbusters are high concept, usually a lot of horror movies are high concept. Usually the high concept means something that's unique or something unexpected, something that's going to delight and surprise the audience when they figure it out. What's interesting here is that they do have a high concept, but it's so complicated that it doesn't work as a high concept because there's no payoff whatsoever.
And there are creepy characters. Toward the beginning, you get introduced to the Dan Stevens character, Herr König, Koenig. Then there's also what we kept calling Bonobo.
I don't remember her name.
Bonobo, but it's Bonomo, Dr. Bonomo. We didn't talk about who she is in this, but she's also odd.
Kind of a side character.
She's at the very beginning, and she introduces herself, and we kind of laugh, Dr. Bonomo. And she stands there, and she's like, oh, really? She just looks at the family, and she's like, oh. And you're wondering, what is her deal?
She gives them a knowing look, and Jeannie and I kind of looked at each other and laughed when we saw that. She's a neighbor who happens to work
the clinic.
At the clinic.
And what kind of trope are we used to seeing in a movie, especially from the 70s? I'm a doctor, I'm at a clinic. That was another thing that was interesting, is there is a clinic, and it's very close to the resort. And there's a doctor. She shows up right at the beginning to be introduced. So we see this movie called Cuckoo. She shows up, and she has an odd name, and she's a doctor, and she's at a clinic. Especially because of the beginning of the movie, which has a spoiler in it. That beginning makes you wonder if someone's going to go crazy. The clinic could be a mental institution or a mental hospital. So there's interesting characters, kooky characters, which made me think Cuckoo. There's an angry protagonist who gets scared at the beginning because of something that happens in the bathroom, and that's sort of a foreshadowing effect, but we don't really know what's going on, and it's not a spoiler. There's the atmosphere of the Alps, there's the resort, there's the Dan Stevens Herr König's house, which is some gigantic place. There's the leaving of the mother where she was living because apparently the mom died. There's a setup where the main character is unhappy and is feeling very isolated. Another thing about the main character, which ties into the sound, she's a musician. She's a bass player. Some of the music has a bass element to it, which I thought was nice. She often will wear headphones because she's listening to her own music and playing with it on bass, or she's listening to something else. She isolates herself by using the headphones. Her sister is this little girl. We didn't even mention how young she was. So the sister's 8 years old. The sister is mute. She can't speak. This is important. The sister can hear, though. She seems to really love everybody. She's rejected by the main character. Gretchen doesn't really want to have anything to do with her. The movie could have been shorter. I know that you said it was well-paced and the editing was good. I felt that in some ways it dragged on and there were some repetitive elements in the film. I felt that the repetition of her working at the resort and having weird things happen at the resort, some of that didn't push the story forward. I felt that there were some scenes where Dan Stevens was just chewing the scenery and talking a lot, and it went on a little bit, and I yawned a few times. It could have been a tighter movie. I know you don't necessarily agree with that.
I think what you're detecting is most likely an issue with the character of the cop. And we can talk a little bit more about that in the spoiler section. But I think that having her be there truly alone in the situation and having to face some horrifying thing is more effective than having some dude in there.
I think it's okay to talk about peripherally if we don't talk about why the cop is around. We can just say that there's another character. You mentioned the actor earlier on saying you recognized him from somewhere. He plays a cop. He shows up and sort of works a little bit with the main character to uncover mysterious goings on, because that's part of what the general premise is, that there's something strange going on there. You're right. That was a lull. When he showed up, it took away from the dynamic between her and her own family. I would say that there was a lot with the Dan Stevens character and he kept showing up and it was repetitive. I felt like that went on a little too much. But having the cop character, he gets important toward the end, I guess, because there's that dichotomy.
It hurts more than it helps.
It does hurt more than it helps. I do agree with you on that.
It's a good horror movie. I think it's effective as far as
solid
atmosphere and location and interesting goings on, as you said. I do think they kind of missed greatness by a little bit, mostly the storytelling. And maybe if they were, I don't know, 10 minutes shorter,
I feel
that would have made a difference.
Yeah, maybe 20.
Yeah, it's excellent. And I think it's creative. I think it's an original horror movie.
And that's what I like about it. It's nostalgic. It feels like it could have been made in the 70s, which I think is kind of cool. And I like that stuff. I'm all about that type of horror. The elements that I mentioned earlier about the use of shadow, the use of sound, the general location is neat. The wind in the trees. There's a lot of atmosphere and this sense of time. And sense of place, really. So all of that was well done. And it was definitely a well-directed film.
Very much so.
There were no issues. I didn't have any issues with direction. There might have been some editing issues just because things went on a little too long. It could have been more of a script issue than visual feel of the movie, because that worked really well. I'll go back to the reason why I felt 70s at first. The hue of the film, the color tones, it felt a little more vintage, a little bit more faded. There's a term for it, and that was really nice. What's interesting about the advertising, they do show the main character having a bandage over her head. She is in the film with the bandage around her head pretty much the second half of the film.
Yeah. Even more.
I felt a little frustrated that we kept seeing that. I think it was almost there to be disturbing to us.
To make us feel there was more jeopardy than there actually was.
Yeah, you're right about the jeopardy. I don't feel that there was a lot of jeopardy. The costume choice, we'll talk about why she had this bandage over her head. That was definitely an issue. There were some other things that felt a little slower than they could be and weren't modified throughout. There wasn't a lot of freshness. There was no arc or growth in the relationship between her and her own father, for example, who's definitely her father. They felt very distant from each other, and there was no feeling of that changing in either direction. It felt pretty much the same throughout. I really like to see a film that shows a nice character arc. Now, the one thing that I can say that we did see with the main character is that there is a change in the way Gretchen feels about her sister. The person that she's basically saying, "You're not my sister." By the end of the film, she really feels that that's her sister. And she has love for her. And she wants to protect her. That's a good thing. The main character, Gretchen, who's a badass and who is kind of not wanting to be around her family, feels very, very damaged and upset about the death of her mother. And she seems just crushed by that. to the point where she calls. This happens a lot with grief. People will call your voicemail, your answering machine, whatever, and leave a message if it's still available after that person is long gone or has passed away, just to hear the person's voice and talk to them. We see this a lot. This is another trope.
We were talking about how it feels kind of a nostalgic horror movie from the 70s. I just found out why a little bit. It's actually shot on film. It's shot on Kodak Vision 3 35mm film. And yeah, it has that look. It has the beautiful, beautiful sharpness and richness of film. It looks like a lot of independent filmmakers are choosing film over digital to kind of separate themselves from the streaming fare you get on Netflix, where they basically tell their filmmakers it has to be shot this way with these approved cameras and these approved lenses. And you gotta do it this way or don't do it at all. So I'm thinking that a lot of these independent filmmakers, if they can afford it, I think they're really going for the film look. And in this particular movie, it works incredibly well.
So, do you think you're ready for the spoiler section?
I am.
All right, let's make that happen. Cuckoo! Spoiler
Cuckoo,
section.
cuckoo.
Cuckoo!
This is the spoiler section.
What type of horror film is this, Luis?
There is a subgenre of horror that I kind of love.
From the 70s.
From the 70s and early 80s, ecological or eco-horror. It came out of the environmental movement where we say, hey, we're destroying the earth, we're killing all the animals. Nature's gonna take revenge on us in some way. And there were a lot of movies like that, but we saw one from a famous director, I forgot the name of it, from 78 about a mutated bear that kills a bunch of people. And it was just fascinating. I think that this particular film feeds very neatly into that vibe.
Well, we also saw Alligator.
True, another one. It's okay.
I
That's
saw that
probably
when
the
I was a
classic
kid,
one.
when I was in the theater.
That's probably the classic one.
Yeah, the Dan Stevens character, Herr König, he keeps talking about the fact that he's a preservationist.
Preservationist.
And I kept saying, well, is he a conservationist or a preservationist? Preservationist. So he did mention that part of the resort is a preserve for wildlife. So I thought, okay, all right. It turns out that Cuckoo is about a bird, probably many birds. There is a prologue right at the beginning of the movie, and you basically have somewhat of an idea that there's something interesting going on with bird-like sounds. Ooh.
Yeah, but we didn't know where that was taking place in the beginning of the movie.
We
didn't
had no
know.
idea, but we thought, well, when they did show up at the resort, that maybe that's where it was. Where else could it be? When I said that there was this use of sound, I was talking about primarily this use of a bird-like sound.
It's terrifying, yeah.
Yeah, but it also combines with like a time shift sound, like a, I don't even know what to call that. It's almost like a sci-fi.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Oh my god. Gretchen is a bassist. The sounds that we're hearing have a bass-y quality to them, whether it's just the music she's listening to, music she's practicing with, or the sound of this bird-like effect. And then you hear a screech over the bass sound, and then the sound of the bass feels like a time shift, like you're going through a time tunnel or something like that. So there's a lot of different things going on.
Time loop.
Yeah, and that's what ends up happening. So I guess we should talk about in general what the big reveal is. Gretchen's younger sister, who she kept saying at the beginning is not her sister. Well, it really isn't her sister because this little girl happens to be the product of a bird-like entity, and the surrogate is her stepmom. There's no blood relation there.
Yeah, the surrogate is inseminated.
The surrogate is inseminated by the bird
creature.
The bird creature.
Which we never see as a bird. We see as a human being that looks weird.
Right, and I would call it an old Hollywood look.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Cuckoo! Here comes the cuckoo. Oh my god. There's a cuckoo. Is she from old Hollywood? It's like the old Hollywood monster. Now, who inseminated the bird? The bird is a
No, she's the
woman-like
product of
creature.
another mother that inseminated
Is there
another
a
human
father?
being. Doesn't seem to be.
Okay, so here we go again. How many movies have we reviewed where there's the missing father element? A lot of the movies that we've reviewed are women-led. There's an issue with the father figure, to the point in this movie where the father didn't even inseminate the stepmom, and the daughter is not his daughter, and it's really the product of a bird and something else. The stepmother was used as a surrogate
Exactly.
for the bird-like creature.
Which would explain why I thought her behavior was a little iffy, like she was kind of aloof or fake, is because in a way she knows, I think deep inside, that the girl's not her daughter. That something else happened the night where she was conceived.
She and the daughter look a lot
She
alike,
got, well, because
and they,
she has some of
they
the
commented
DNA.
on that.
Now, what's funny about this movie in our podcast, which happens to be quite evil, is that I could swear that there's a changeling aspect. This is a weird retelling of the changeling idea that, they come out of the woods and they are from a previous time. They're magical beings, they're strange, and they replace a human child with a fake child who's a changeling that looks like us, talks like us, but it's not us. And eventually they come back and they take that child away. That's kind of the very down and dirty description of it. I feel like that's the inspiration behind this thing. Because, of course, cuckoos are real birds. They will lay their eggs on someone else's nest, and they push the other eggs away out of the nest.
I don't think it was a changeling because it wasn't replaced. It was the actual creature, which is the product of the bird-like creature and who knows what else. At the beginning, there is a situation where the screeching sound and the bassy sound mixed together occurs, and you see a female character getting affected by that, almost looking like they're having some sort of a epileptic seizure. Yeah. And then they end up leaving or running away. And we do see the character again later. But the key is that after that, we hear someone saying, "Oh, the nestling is left and flown the coop," or something. Before that, we hear people fighting in German. Why are they arguing? Did we ever know what's going on with that?
In a big fight, clearly going off the rails very fast. And then the wife suddenly gets silenced and starts whimpering. And then the daughter, who's listening to it underneath on the first floor or something like that, her ear moves in a strange way.
Right, wiggles.
And she starts having that kind of seizure-like behavior.
Yes.
And she takes off into the woods. And there's
say,
a spoilerish phone call that they say, "Oh yeah, the nestling is disturbed, so she flew the coop," or something like that.
That's what I just said.
Yeah.
But I was making that up.
Yeah.
But that was funny that you said the same
something
thing.
to the effect of that.
Yeah, so we knew there was some bird-like thing going on.
And then it cuts to the family of the protagonist arriving
at the resort. That kind of gives a lot away right at the beginning. And we already know, the cuckoo's a bird, and there's something about nestling, but we don't see that the person that's having the attack has any sort of bird-like quality, so we're not really sure what's going on there. Yeah. Dan Stevens keeps talking about how he's a preservationist and wildlife. That's why the family is there in the first place. I guess they work in tandem, the husband and wife team. Louise and Beth, the father and the stepmother, they're apparently working together to extend the resort or do something with...
That's never clear.
That's never clear, and they never do any work throughout the entire movie. But Dan Stevens keeps saying that he's a preservationist and this is about wildlife. And then, of course, you find out later he's trying to somehow preserve this phenomenon, which I don't know how this even happened.
They even have a name for it. It's Homo, and then it's the species of the Cuculia.
We don't know where this came from, and there are experiments that were already started that made these creatures. That would be a 70s trope, where someone experimented on a person or experimented on an animal and created a hybrid creature. We really don't know the origin of why this happened. We just know that Dan Stevens' character is weird, and the doctor's a little weird. They are catering to this bizarre type of cuckoo, which is like a cuckoo human. There's a honeymoon picture where the main character Gretchen finds out that her father and stepmother had their honeymoon at this same resort. And then you find out from the police officer character, and I put that in quotes because I'm not even sure if he's really a police officer.
He used to be.
Before he went, maybe he went cuckoo. Yeah, because his wife died or...
She was impregnated, trying to conceive. She wasn't turned to the side and she ended up drowning in her own vomit.
It wasn't really, in my opinion, a spoiler, but I guess you could say it is because that's part of the strange goings on. There's characters that show up during the film that are having problems keeping their food down. meltdown. They're like showing up and vomiting and in distress. And they're coming to the resort area where there's food and like a little mini mart. And they keep going over and they're drinking some of the stuff and then they're throwing up. And they're like, what is going on? Are people drunk or like, what's happening
It happens
here?
too often and it's repetitive.
That's the repetitive stuff.
And it's kind of nonsensical
that I didn't
for
like.
most of the movie.
It's not that effective. Who cares about someone throwing up all the time? It's just gross. It's not that interesting.
Yeah, and I will make a criticism. I am being picky. There's an exposition dump in the beginning that's so overt. It's like, my mom has died, and here I am, with my younger sister, and I hate her. She's not really my sister.
Right.
And it's so funny because it's a well-written movie in general, but they really felt like they had to
make a big deal
kind of do an exposition dump right in the beginning. Otherwise, they would lose everyone. And what I said earlier is that I think that the police officer kind of gets in the way. At some point, they even try to make him into some sort of a semi-villain.
Right.
The protagonist has to free herself of him.
Ultimately, he wants to get rid of Alma, who is the younger sister, because she represents this hybrid creature. He doesn't want them to proliferate. Probably because of his wife's death. Now, there's grief going on in this movie, which is an interesting theme because his wife died. So he has grief about that, and that's affecting his mentality. And he joins forces with the main character to try to take out this species. They have different goals, but he's trying to utilize her to help him meet his goal. And part of it is going to be eventually taking out her younger sister. Dan Stevens' character wants to get rid of her, wants to take Gretchen out because she's interfering with the whole proliferation thing herself. Proliferation of the species. She knows too much. She had weird contacts with the bird-like creature that looks like an old Hollywood Sunset Boulevard sunglasses scarf woman.
Big heavy
Looks
coat.
like Gloria Swanson from Sunset Boulevard if she was to go outside in the hot sun and make sure she's not noticed by putting a wig on and some sunglasses. That to me didn't really work as a scary creature.
It was more startling
strange.
than anything.
Yeah, and that's the character that shows up in the bathroom, as we mentioned earlier. But all we see are the boots, so we have no idea what's going on. We hear the screechy sound. We don't see anything else. The character shows up again in a very effective scene where the main character, Gretchen, is riding a bike away from the resort. She's pedaling along, and you know that there's some sense of urgency because Dan Stevens says, you cannot continue to service your customers after 10 at my resort. You've got people coming in all the time after 10.
And you gotta lock the doors.
She made a big deal about that too. She says, people keep coming in after 10. Oh no, you gotta lock the doors. She was saying that someone was in distress because they were vomiting, and it was obviously some person that's either transforming or partially hybrid bird.
Yeah, it's fine. There's a confused guest and I need to go check on her, but I have my bike here, so you don't need to pick me up.
Gretchen, listen to me carefully. I need you to lock the door.
She hangs up the phone and she's just gonna bike out the door and she doesn't care. So while she's pedaling, she's got her headphones on. This happens a lot where the headphones are used to block out the screech. And we'll talk about that in a moment, why the screech needs to be blocked out. That's part of the issue that happened at the beginning, and it happens several times in the movie. She's pedaling along on her bike. What I thought was a really neat, effective element was the use of shadow. She's pedaling along. You can see her on the ground with a light. Moon is lighting up the ground.
Very sharp
Maybe
shadow.
some street lights, I'm not sure.
Oh, it was a street light.
Was it a street
for
light?
sure, yeah.
Okay, she's pedaling along. Her shadow looks weird enough. And all of a sudden, you see from behind another shadow getting closer behind her. And that's scary. That was well done. Then you see a claw reaching out to grab her. Oh, what was that? Was that her?
Yeah.
Nice use of shadow. Oh, show someone. Oh, that's neat. Right? Oh my god. Oh my god! Oh my god! That was pretty effective. You see the old-timey Sunset Boulevard, old Hollywood creature grabbing and reaching out. Doesn't look like a bird at all, by the way.
Not at all. With red Terminator eyes, by the way.
And then they go black at some point. The bird-like character does the screech. Her mouth opens into a Dying of Fright from The Ring movie look. It's like a contorted, long, open mouth. This is the creature. This does not look like a bird. There's plenty of actors that you could have just gotten who already have either a hook nose or a pointy nose. I know that this was a low budget indie horror
It's like
film.
under $500,000.
I know that they didn't want to use a lot of effects and a lot of makeup and stuff like that, but at the very, very least, why not get an actor who has a pointy nose or a beak-like nose, or even put something
Maybe
like
she looked
that
too much
on?
like a witch.
But it was strange to me because it didn't look anything like a bird. The old Hollywood thing, even at night, why not take off those clothes at night and show the real look of the creature?
You know what? The Dan Stevens character basically say that he trained the cuckoos. He's training them. He uses a flute.
Right.
And then
it's a
trains-
recorder, I think.
Yeah, and then he gives them a wig. I think he came up with that look. Maybe it's a look that he came up with.
It's so weird.
So they would blend in with the humans.
You don't see them in normal society. You only see them wearing boots in a bathroom.
Yeah,
and you
that's
don't see
very-
them. It's like they're trying to hide. So
Yeah.
why would they blend in? They don't blend
I think
in.
it's a look they have because he provided that to them. And we know he provided the wigs. There's not enough. Yeah.
They're hiding. We never see them.
We don't see enough of the creature
No.
other than the one creature. That's the explanation.
Now that would be more
He's a
interesting.
weirdo. He dressed them in a weird
That
way.
would have been more interesting to have the old Hollywood creature show up in a normal situation in the day or in the night with her scarf, with her weird eyes or with her sunglasses, with her hood, strange garb, their wig and everything, and go, and something like that. Maybe they don't talk, they just go, okay, so maybe they show up and they don't fully speak. Who is that unusual looking person? Why have them dressed at all like that if they're not trying to blend
See,
in?
that's a really good point. And
That
that's
would have been
because
scary.
there's not enough suspense in this.
No.
There's not enough quiet moments with someone that's seemingly out of the ordinary or
Right.
abnormal,
No.
hovering in a subtle way
Right.
that makes you question who they are.
I would have been scared
Every
of
time
that.
this creature shows up is accompanied by the crazy sound effects, the thump, 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 low frequency, the time loops immediately start. So we never have an opportunity to just see that creature existing as an animal.
There are probably 3 to 4 sections post-prologue. I don't think it really happens in the prologue in the way that we see it later. First time we see it is when she's listening with her headphones and doing her bass, and the little girl, Alma, comes into her room and then something weird happens. And she's protected by her headphones. Gretchen is protected from this sound, but Alma hears it. There's an interesting thing that goes on with what we're calling a time shift. I think that much more could have been done with that. It could have been a lot scarier.
Good point.
I'll just describe the first scene, and then maybe we can describe the last scene, because I think the bookend is really interesting. The first time we really understand what's going on is when Alma shows up in Gretchen's bedroom while Gretchen is practicing her bass. She's listening to a song, possibly from her band, because she is in
It
a
definitely
band,
is, yeah.
from her headphones, and she's practicing bass along with a song. She's basically protected because she's not going to hear the thump thump screech that ends up happening. Now Alma's standing there.
She
Gretchen
loves
has
music.
no idea because Gretchen has her back to her. Yeah, she likes music. And then something happens. Now remember, we know later that Alma is really not a full human. So she hears the screech, she hears the low subwoofer-ish sound, the boom, 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 boom. Almost sounds like an MRI. I'm just thinking.
Kind of, yeah.
You know, I had to think about
When
what
did they
that
sample
sound
that?
was. You hear the sound, and then the same sequence that's happening in the bedroom with Gretchen listening to the bass and turning around and doing something, it happens again.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like time repeats.
Yeah.
And so she sees the same thing happen. And then she sees the same thing happen, but it gets shorter and shorter and shorter.
What?
Wait, why? Did they really
There's a
go
time
back?
shift.
Oh. Wow. It's getting closer. That's
Yeah.
neat.
Wow.
That's neat. I like that. Oh.
What?
That's the first time we see it. The last time we see this is going to explain it a little bit better. So she shows up again, the one from the very, very, very beginning that runs off, and they said something about a nestling, and she has this shaking thing. Alma has a similar shaking almost like a seizure that happens during that sequence that we just described. Then fast forward to almost the end of the movie. We see this over and over again. Gretchen being affected again by time. I think she's taking a stick and breaking it on her knee. She's going to use it as a weapon. She sees this character coming toward her. The character is coming toward her, and the character keeps on coming toward her. It doesn't get affected by time. See how she keeps walking over and... Oh, she's right there! She's right there. Oh, there she is.
It's not an absolute time loop or time shift. It's a time loop that only happens within the consciousness of the person that's being affected by that special sound that's emitted by the cuckoo. When the cuckoo creatures emits that sound, the humans get very placid and can't do much, and they can't execute.
They keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Or they think they are.
There's always a close-up of a gullet, and it's supposed to be like something that speaks to either from the bird.
Yeah, it's supposed to be the vocal cords of the bird creature.
The Alma character, who we find out later is really a bird-like creature, came from a bird, basically. A cuckoo. When perhaps her real mother is making the screeching sound.
When she's nearby making the sound, yeah.
Alma is affected. She's thrown into sort of a seizure. Gretchen had her headphones on, so she didn't get affected at all by the screech. She takes her headphones off, and then Gretchen, as you said, is affected by what is a weird time perception that's not affecting Alma, but Alma's having the seizure. That's the way she's being affected. I guess the humans don't have seizures. The creatures that are nestlings, they will have seizures, but they won't get this weird time perception problem. And then Alma ends up scratching her, and every time they show the repetition, it's a shorter
it gets shorter every time,
which I thought was fascinating. I love... It's almost like a game mechanic. I love when movies, shows, any form of entertainment utilize some sort of... It's almost like a sci-fi element of a time warp or a change. But the sad part for me personally with this is I don't feel like it was used in a way that caused fear, a feeling of horror or dread or anticipation or
surprise or delight.
I didn't
it's
feel
wasted.
It was just a mechanic.
Just thrown in.
But it was so interesting, and I wish more had been done with it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think that there's a unrealized potential in this thing.
There's definitely some good ideas.
It's excellent. Yeah. It's just not a great movie.
No.
And that's just
it misses the mark.
Because of this little things here and there. It's not anything major other than we think some writing issues with maybe some extraneous characters. Like the cop, like there's a woman who works with her at a store. That was almost like a Terminator reference, by the way.
Right.
You know, and the Terminator eyes that we saw earlier. And
yeah, the woman who works with her, there wasn't much done with her. This is an interesting element that we didn't talk about. There's this pink bungalow that is known as the Love Nest, and that is part of the resort. And it's an area where people get impregnated.
Yeah, that's where it happens.
Because that is probably where her father and her stepmother went, because they talked about how they were there. And she was impregnated as a surrogate for what ends up being Alma, who's not a full human being. And that happened at the Love Nest. For some reason, the person that's working at the resort, and I should say the main desk, front desk.
She's having some sort of affair with a cop.
Not the cop that we were talking about, but a different cop. And he knows the other cop, by the way. Yeah. I think they used to work together, and then the other guy retired. They're having some affair, so she's going to be the next person possibly to be impregnated.
Well, actually, it was going to happen. But once the cop realized that she was insisting on doing it there... Right. He was freaking out because he knew what happened there. He was in on it. So he was panicking in the beginning, and he was freaking out and telling her, we can't be here, we can't be here.
But why did he go in the first place? Because they set it up to be there. And
I don't know, it's a lot of sense.
Rose petals on the ground.
After he got there, he realized maybe he didn't know she actually wanted to have sex in that place. I don't get it.
Oh, please.
But he gets there and he panics after the fact. And then he realizes what's about to happen, and she almost gets impregnated.
I don't know if that was even... Yeah.
But it's another example of these extraneous kids. There's two cops,
ideas.
A real cop and a fake one. One who's corrupt.
A retired one,
One who's not corrupt.
The one that is quote-unquote not corrupt, I think he is also corrupt because he's trying to kill her sister. So
yeah, he's going to kill a 7-year-old or something, or 8-year-old.
He is. Everybody has problems. But the biggest issue with me personally is we've got two major characters in this film that basically do nothing. The parents. Nothing. We've got the father, And we've got the stepmother.
Yeah.
They are
Dead
completely
weight.
useless.
Dead weight.
And they really were giving away a lot. They have Alma show up in glasses with feathers on them. How obvious
That's
is that?
interesting.
And then she never wears them again. And then we see the stepmother with this white Angora-like sweater, but it had feathers on it. It was
Well,
very feathery.
This is really
Let's
interesting.
just say that.
Ghost Story, thanks for reminding me of the right title. Based on the book, it's a 1981 horror movie. There's a character called Alma who seems to be a normal woman who they're all fighting for, but she turns out to be a ghost at the end. And she's their comeuppance. And what I'm saying is that naming your character, who's not what she seems to be, Alma, is a dead giveaway.
There were some characters in here that didn't have a lot of screen time, that didn't have a lot going on, that were important because there were family issues here. We should talk about the answering machine. When is this taking place? Is this in the 80s, 70s? Answering machine? It's not a cell phone.
They're trying to confuse us on
This is very
purpose.
confusing. She gets a box. One box. A box that could fit 6 books. A tiny box, basically. She opens up the box, and it's got the answering machine in it and some other odds and ends, knickknacks. And the answering machine is the one that she had been calling. So all this time it had been sent over, apparently from the US to Germany. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is the funny thing. You find out that this is all of her mother's belongings from the house, and that her father and stepmother, without telling her ahead of time, have sold the house and sent that box to her. I don't know why they didn't take it with them. So the timing makes no sense.
Yeah.
They all arrived at the resort in Germany in the same car together. She thought, Gretchen, that she had a house waiting for her back home where she lived with her mom. Her mom has died, but she was going to go back to that house. But for some weird reason, the father arranged to sell the house without Gretchen's knowledge at some point in time. Who knows when? Were they on the phone selling it while they were in Germany? A small box, looks like an Amazon box,
Yeah.
of knickknacks and an answering machine arrives, and that's all of her mother's possessions. It's like, oh, this is for you. This is addressed to you, Gretchen. This is all your mom's possessions from the house that you no longer can go back to. So that's already weird enough and almost laughable. She starts playing the answering machine. It shows the answering machine tape, and it has her message. She's left many, but it plays one of her messages. I want to go back home. I love you. Weird things are happening. She knows her mom's gone, but she's speaking to her, which I thought was sentimental. We've seen it as a nice little trope. And then there's another message on there from Alma. And Alma uses speech software, speech synthesis, or...
Oh, yeah, that's the one smartphone that pops up.
There we go. Thank you. So now we know it is in present day. But yet it's an answering machine.
They're really confusing
that
us.
her mom had in her home that she lived with her daughter. They still had an answering machine, apparently.
Yeah.
So Alma uses this cell phone app that we saw at the very beginning when they were in the car. She was speaking through it. She leaves a message for Gretchen's mom and says something nice about Gretchen. I don't even remember what it was. I just thought it was so bizarre. Yeah. It's in that same app. So we never hear Alma speak again. We only hear her at the very beginning when she's in the car. And then we hear it in the answering machine. These are little smatterings of interesting, weird stuff. Having Alma, like you said, be a weird character. At the very end of the movie, we know that Alma is really a product of a bird-like creature and who knows who else. And you said it has nothing to do with the father, which also meant that they're not sisters at all. Having Alma leave that message was weird enough, and having Alma speak through the app at the beginning was also a little creepy. Why didn't we do more of that? These are little pieces, little snippets of things that were really interesting that were not used enough and effectively. And that whole thing about getting this little box, getting this answering machine, having Alma's voice on there, which is also not her real voice, but the app's voice, was weird.
Oh, before she even heard the voice message. It's weird enough that the voice machine starts playing the thing automatically.
I know.
Except that those things were not
No.
battery powered in
No.
the 70s. They were
No.
plugged in the main
They
line.
were plugged in.
So how was that playing? I
I'm
know,
not-
it seemed like a portable unit.
It could
But
have
so
been a
the
portable
batteries
unit.
were good still?
It could have been a portable unit, but it's really strange. So they played the greeting and then they played her, Gretchen's message.
And she saw the light blinking in the machine, and then she heard her sister's voice message.
We were talking about the end. They had that retired police officer who's going through this grieving process because of his wife dying. We see him, a character that's not really needed. However, at the end, we see why he's being utilized. And then we have the Dan Stevens character. And they are both at odds. Dan Stevens is trying to kill Gretchen, and retired police officer character is trying to kill Alma. So you got the two sisters in the middle, holding each other, trying to escape from the area because Dr. Bonomo is doing an experiment. So they're trying to escape and they're hugging each other. Gretchen specifically turns so that she is closer to retired police officer and Alma is closer to Dan Stevens. And so if Dan Stevens tries to shoot, it's going to be harder to shoot Gretchen, who might hit Alma because Alma's closer, and vice versa. So they're able to escape for that reason. Alma finally shows that she's bird-like by making the screeching sound. Although, again, I just don't think it was very effective.
And it's not just that she's bird-like, but that she wasn't, quote-unquote, mute. She just isn't human. Because her sister makes a big deal about her little sister's mute. I don't know why she's mute. She can hear. In the end, when the little girl uses her special ability to save them from death, it's a triumphant moment for the character, for the both of them. It shows an understanding of the nature of each other. And that's part of the arc that Jeannie said is so nice about it.
That was the one thing that worked. And the two male characters end up shooting each other because they experience the weird time shift. Oh no. That's a neat way. That's clever.
It's very brilliant.
That's clever. I thought they were just going to kill each other immediately without
Me
thinking.
too.
Well, I guess they kind of did. It's off screen though. We don't see the two characters getting confused and having that time shift. They end up just killing each other.
They kill each other off screen.
Yeah, we don't see that happen, which is weird. We forgot about another character, Ed.
Oh, yeah. But that's, again,
Thrown in,
badly utilized, barely there.
Yeah,
It
used
doesn't
as
make
a love interest for the main character Gretchen, but also used as a possible savior character where she was going to take her away and whisk her off to France. Gretchen wants to run away. She gets in the car, and this is another moment where the time shift happens. It's nighttime. You hear the bird-like creature at some point. They're in a car, and the car ends up crashing because it's confusing. The time shift element, again, perception of time, and then they end up crashing, and they both end up in the hospital. Guess what? There were 2 times where Gretchen got hurt. Oh, she got scratched originally
But that
by
was in the
Alma.
hospital.
Was she never in the hospital before the accident?
When she boinked her head on the glass door.
So she has this weird thing with the bike, the shadow and the bird-like creature coming at her. She runs into the emergency clinic and she bonks her head on the inside glass door, and then she's taken in and she's in the hospital. So basically she's in the hospital for messed up bloodied face, but it's pretty minor. So first she gets scratched by Alma. She's not in the hospital for that. Then she runs into a glass door in the
She
hospital.
needs a bunch of stitches for that
And
one,
then she
though.
needs stitches on her head. So she's already in the hospital for one reason. It was like, what are you doing? They think she's on drugs or something. And then she, again, ends up in the hospital because she and this other character named Ed tries to help her run away, basically. They're in the car. They have that time shift thing happen again. The bird-like character screeches, and they end up being run off the road because they're confused. Then it's much worse injuries. And they're both in the hospital. Throughout the rest of the movie, after that automobile accident, main character Gretchen has a bandage on her head from before. Now, half of her face looks completely messed up. And then she has this cast and her jacket falling off. That's her costume for the rest of the movie. And it's kind of unnerving because you feel like she can't really do much in this costume. She's kind of immobilized. And I don't know if that was done on purpose, but it made me nervous and it was really distracting for me to see her in that costume throughout the rest of the movie.
I think it was just to raise the sense of danger and peril.
I guess.
It's just not enough.
It didn't.
You know?
It just made me uncomfortable and made me distracted. I kept thinking, okay, her thing's going to fall down. Her sling is going to come off her shoulder. It was a noisy costume to have on.
I was completely stumped about the bread station wagon in the beginning. I actually asked someone on Facebook and he said it's a Triumph 2500. Jeannie spotted the Triumph badge, but we couldn't figure out what specific model was. And it's funny because before I got the answer on Facebook, I actually asked Google's Gemini and he nailed it. And he got it right. So, wow. One car I can't identify in the movie.
I know. He identifies everything. He's always looking out for anachronisms. He often will just find all the problems. And not just with cars, but with technology in general.
Yeah. Computers, televisions, VCRs, games. I just love that stuff. But yeah, I was so confused in the beginning.
So anything else you want to say about
No,
the
I
movie?
think I'm ready to give the verdict. You know what? I will say thumbs up.
I'm going to give it a very mild thumbs up.
Yeah.
I had a lot of problems with it. I was excited about it. There were a lot of interesting things that could have happened that didn't happen. So that's why I can't give it a hearty thumbs up. But I like the effort. And I know it was a fairly low budget film, indie. And there were a lot of things I liked about it. I almost wish it could be redone in a way that really
Like a
grabbed
director's cut, you know?
Like the director's cut, exactly.
I would give it an encouraging thumbs up. I think if you're into horror movies, this is not one of the boring ones. This is not trying to be highfalutin and not scare you. It's worth a watch.
I wouldn't say it's boring, but I would say that there are repetitive elements that might make it a little slower than it should be. That's
Other
what I
than
would
that,
say.
by all means, right now
Give
it's
it a
on
try.
Hulu.
Cuckoo.
It's also on Disney Plus. We suggest watching it on Disney Plus for picture quality, sound quality.
Yeah, compared to Hulu, yes. But Hulu's fine as well.
Hulu should be okay. But yeah, it's a good little movie. I really think the budget, I think MDB says is $400-something thousand. Very well
Great for that.
utilized.
Yeah,
you know,
that.
looks beautiful. And the 35mm photography on this is just astounding. It looks incredible.
Yes,
So if you're an indie filmmaker and you have the budget, shoot it on film.
absolutely.
Even 16mm, even if it's Super 16, it's better than digital. Unless you need to do like
If you
120 takes per scene, sure.
Yeah, if you can, if it's possible, do it.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for bearing with us.
Cuckoo!
We all should be
Yes.
cuckoo from time to time.
Oh, yes. Actually, birds are wonderful, and we love birds. And we didn't even talk about that, but birds are our friends. We love crows, we love scrub jays, we love sparrows. They're all over the place where we live,
In
so
fact,
we're cool with that.
there was a severe lack of actual birds in this movie.
Yeah.
And I will lodge a complaint.
Baka!
Paka! Bye for now.
Bye for now.